common roots of anguish, angst, anxiety, anger, and arrogance. I am an expert on both bitterness and arrogance. My extensive first-hand experience with those patterns of experience makes me an authority on those subjects. And by the way, I'm not just being arrogant when I claim this distinction. In fact, I have had at least a few people repeatedly tell me that I was arrogant. Without being told, I already knew when I was bitter. But arrogance is one of those things that people may be hesitant about claiming for themselves. People who are being arrogant may prefer other terms such as justified, or right, or righteous. Which reminds me of the term self-righteous. Which reminds me of the terms antagonistic and arrogant and rude and jerk. As for those who are thinking of the term righteous, as in spiritual purity, note that I prefer the term spiritual purity. Notice how rare it is that someone would say, "Of course I'm being a jerk, but it is entirely justified." People just tend to skip the whole middle part and focus on, "I am justified." They don't say, "I'm being a jerk" or "I'm being arrogant," generally speaking. They just focus on how justified they are, how right they are, and specifically how they're right and how they're justified and so on. So when I've been arrogant, I always had excellent rationalizations for being arrogant. Good reasons. At least according to me. I'm only being an arrogant, self-righteous jerk, I would say. Okay, I wouldn't say this, but imagine someone saying, "I'm only being an arrogant, self-righteous jerk because of the following excellent justifications. I'd like to tell you about them now, and I'd like to be very loud as I do so. Are you ready? No? Well, that's your problem, not mine. Here I go." So being arrogant can be an interesting way to invite attention to oneself. It is an advertisement of a dominant concern with being the deliverer of some particular communication. Everybody else shut up, and I'm going to say something now. Typically, some kind of a criticism that includes a condemnation. That's often a primary content feature of an arrogant communication. Criticism featuring condemnation. By the way, criticism does not require condemnation. Criticism can simply identify anything that might be missing. Like if there is a table but there's no legs on the table and there's just a top, then you could say, my main criticism on that table is there's no legs. So criticism could be identifying anything that's missing, as well as identifying anything that might be excessive or less than the best possible. Like if you get a 97 on a test, there's the 3% that you didn't get right, and you could say, well, it's the marking of those items wrong is a criticism of the incorrect answer, the inaccurate or the answer that was not given credit. Maybe somebody didn't even fill in an answer. There you go, you missed 3%. So this identifying of what's missing or what's excessive, those are all based on interpretations, some perspective or an interpretive or evaluative system. So criticisms are the natural products of a particular perspective, and that perspective can include condemnation, like moral condemnation, shaming, social repulsion, social, I would say, terror is part of that condemnation. Anyway, when I am being arrogant, I want someone to listen to me. I want someone to understand me. And these are, entirely valid, right? Being arrogant is entirely valid. When I'm arrogant, I want someone to listen to me. I want somebody to understand me. I want sympathy. But there's an additional thing. I want someone to help me deal with an underlying issue or anxiety or fear. And I may not even want to admit that kind of issue is present as far as a anxiety or fear. or frustration or whatever it may be. I may not be eager to actually resolve it on my own or simply ask someone humbly for help, so hence arrogance. I'm testing with arrogance to identify someone who can assist me in handling my distress, and like a really high degree of interest in me personally. I'm also testing for how interested is someone in me personally when I'm being arrogant, saying, how much do you value me? Do you value me enough to deal with the arrogance as well as the underlying distress? So there's a test of competence, willingness, a variety of things. Arrogance is a little bit complex relative to simply asking someone for help and saying, hey, I'm anxious. Could you help me resolve this particular circumstance? Or could you help me understand the anxiety that I'm experiencing? Things like that. So arrogance, also known as righteousness, at least in the sense of self-righteousness. Arrogance, self-righteousness, is fundamentally an indicator signaling distress, terror, fear, doubt, a lack of faith, a lack of clarity and groundedness and stability and capacity to produce results that are valued. So I recently wrote to someone these words. You're not just bitter, you've also been arrogant. When I was arrogant, you've even been bitter that I was arrogant, rather than just noticing the arrogance. Are you offended when a frightened idiot displays arrogance, or you just notice it? Sometimes we might just notice arrogance. So arrogance is a lot of fear covered with a brief, sudden surfacing of anger. Whenever the fear is recognized, that's when the anger comes up. No, I can do it myself. There's a fear of whether I can do it myself. If I come up with this angry, no, I can do it myself. Can you hear that concern for someone's witnessing of me failing? I'm concerned about failing, and I'm particularly concerned about someone else witnessing me failing. And so I angrily, arrogantly say, no, I can do it myself. As distinct from, no, I can do it myself. Thanks for offering. So, when the arrogant anger subsides, the basic anxiety and paranoia is still present. The fear of fear itself. So underneath that arrogant, no, I can do it myself, is the fear of admitting the fear. Actually, I doubt my own capacity to be able to do it myself, and I'm angry about my lack of confidence in my ability to do it myself. So that's the basic anxiety and paranoia under which the anger can suddenly spike up and spark up and shoot out like a lightning bolt or whatever. No, I can do it myself. Thank you very much. Obviously said with that rude tone. So now back to the actual title that I gave this piece. I didn't know the title until I wrote this next section. Notice the words anguish, anxiety, angst, and anger all have many letters in common. The ANG or ANX in the case of anxiety, but they all have the same roots. Anguish comes from a Latin term meaning a tight place, equivalent to the word narrow, related to anger and anguish. I'm sorry, anguish is related to anger and anxious. Anguish goes back to the term choking sensation, distress, anxiety, rage, torment, acute bodily or mental suffering, a strangling, a narrowness. Anxiety, uneasy, troubled mind, related to the word choke or cause distress. Tightness, narrowness, torment, anger, anguish. So, angst, how about that one? Neurotic fear, anxiety, guilt, remorse, related to the Old High German Angst from the root of anger. It's actually the word angst is common in English because of the work of Sigmund Freud and how it was translated. Or actually, the word angst was the German word that wasn't translated, and Freud's translations, okay, Voigt's translations from German into English featured the word Angst, which was untranslated. It's just a German word. And it was used so often that it became included within the English language around the 1940s. On to anger. It's related to sorrow and grief and fear. And the older words for narrow and strangle. Anger, grieve, vex, distress, grief, affliction, narrow, painful. To stretch, round, tight, painfully constricted. To squeeze. So, anger, angst, anguish, and anxiety all have common roots. All of those words are related to exasperation, like being out of breath or having trouble breathing, being exhausted. The experience of desperation or despair, and terror, like holding your breath in fear. I'm out of breath and I'm holding my breath. That's anxiety. Can you imagine that? And I hold my breath, and then suddenly there might be another oh my God. That, not a sigh, but a that sound of frustration and irritability. Like I've been holding my breath. There's that tension of holding my breath. And then almost a coughing sound. And there's a lot of force that can be behind that, because if there's a lot of pressure internally in terms of air pressure, and then there's a relaxing of the muscles that are repressing that air, then all of a sudden it's released quickly, kind of like a balloon. If you not poke a balloon, but if you undo the bottom of the balloon, then it goes like that. Well, sometimes people who are in anguish or anger, they'll just kind of vent. You know the word vent? Well, it's related to wind and the ventilation, the flow of the air coming out suddenly. So when one holds their breath, there's not a lot of oxygen going to the brain. You have to breathe in, you have to breathe out, you have to let out the carbon dioxide, let in the oxygen. There has to be oxygen present. You can't be underwater. So catching your breath, being out of breath. All of that, angst, anxiety, anger, anguish, all of these are related to breathing somehow. Rage is like being squeezed tight. Can you imagine? Can you recall the experience of rage and the tightness? Somebody balls their hands up into a fist, squeezes tight, and shakes with rage. The tension can be suffocating, similar to a panic attack of asthma or some other form of panic attack. Tremendous tension, suffocation, exasperation, out of breath, short of breath, can barely. I'm so frustrated, right? So here's what Jesus said about anger and the raging fires of the hell of rage. This is from Matthew 5:20 through 22. For I say to you that unless your goodness will exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You've heard that it was said to the ancients, do not murder, and whoever murders is condemned to judgment. But I'm saying to you that everyone who will be angry against his brother without cause is condemned before the judge. And everyone who will say to his brother, I spit on you, you fool, is condemned before the assembly. And whoever will say, you fool, is condemned to the Gehenna of fire, the hell of rage. Resentment, bitterness, which can lead to arrogance. So James 3:6, another book of the Bible. This is from a letter written by one of the disciples of Jesus. James in 3:6 says, the tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. And when James is referring to the tongue as a fire, I didn't include verse 5 there, but he refers to a forest, and then you set the forest on fire, and the entire forest goes down just because of a small spark. And the tongue is like a spark or a fire that can destroy an entire forest. It can burn your bridges instead of just crossing the bridges and moving on. You can burn bridges, and that can be valuable. So arrogance has a function. So does anxiety. So does anguish. All these things. They have functions. They are functions, you could say. It may not be most functional to avoid them, as in totally repress or deny anger or arrogance, and so on. The old biblical saying, "Turn away from evil," implies withdrawing from what is terrifying or disturbing. But not to condemn it or judge against it, but to complete the upset, the disturbance, and experience, once again, peace, and even courage and appreciation, even a sense of humor. Avoiding arrogance and anxiety could keep you stuck in them until you get firmly planted in admitting your own arrogance. You cannot step beyond it. It's like being in Oregon and trying to cross the border into Colorado. There's a problem with that idea. Oregon does not border Colorado. One can go through Utah to get from Oregon to Colorado. You have to go through arrogance if you have that bitterness and resentment. Arrogance is just the natural thing. You have to, witness, express your own arrogance, and then witness that you've been arrogant. And that leads to the opportunity to repent. Once you recognize, oh, I've been arrogant. Jeez. I've been being righteous and being justified and being arrogant, being a jerk. So that's an opportunity at that stage to shift. So you can then step into arrogance fully and humbly. And then you'll have the opportunity to experience next anxiety directly and learn its value. Again, arrogance is an anger that hides anxiety, or at least that's the idea. I can do it myself, all right? And there's that background of, well, maybe I won't do it adequately by myself, and I sure don't want anybody else to see me fail at trying to do it myself. So there's that fear in the background, that anxiety in the background of anger and arrogance, which is basically the same as anger. Or the same as rage, we could say. We could point to very functional uses of anger to interrupt and draw attention, again, to say, hey, don't step out in front of that car. Okay, once you've got attention of someone, then you can immediately back off. So there's no resentment implied in anger. Rage typically has been built up over time through resentment, which takes a lot of energy to build it up and to hold it back. And it's fine, it has a function. That breakthrough of rage is useful sometimes. So when you step into arrogance fully and humbly, then you'll have the opportunity to experience the next thing, anxiety, and learn its value. Until then, anxiety may remain something for you to avoid and deny, something to be afraid of, something to call evil and label as negative. Be anxious about anxiety. You'll be afraid of fear itself until you step fully into arrogance and admit arrogance, and then you can take a look at anxiety without looking at anxiety from that arrogant position of condemning it. So there may be a sense, an arrogant sense, especially in that mode of bitterness. There may be a sense of other people should never be anxious, like even children. Why are they so anxious sometimes? And you get that frustration and bitterness. Well, that's actually anxiety. That's, in fact, an instance of arrogance. Why should they be so arrogant? They should never be so anxious. They shouldn't be bitter. I'm the one who deserves justification for being bitter. I have a monopoly on bitterness, baby, and you better back off because there's not room for the both of us. And that's fine. There may not be room for the both of two people who are in that terror of bitterness. But it is a a terror. So you can't have the sense of humor about anxiety or terror until you admit arrogance without needing to fall back into bitterness. You want to be able to have a sense of humor about arrogance and anxiety, step into arrogance. Say, yeah, I've been arrogant. I've been a jerk, whatever. And that's a wonderful thing to experience, even falling back into bitterness. It's good if you're arrogant and are afraid of admitting arrogance, or if someone is. It's great that they can fall back to bitterness and rage and things like that, resentment. That's functional for them. Until they're ready to openly enter anxiety, they're going to need to revert back to rage and stuff like that. That's totally how it was for me. So if you ever master anxiety, then your experience of living may dramatically shift, like stepping out of hell into heaven, which allegedly is similar to stepping out of Utah and into Oregon, but not quite the same. Remember, the one who enjoys life the most loses the game of hell, which is the whole resentment, rage realm. Beware of enjoying hell, or it may turn out to be a dream from which no one can escape without sacrificing bitterness, arrogance, and even anxiety, angst, anguish, and anger. I got a reply down here where I make a comment about Oregon and Colorado and Utah. I've never been to Utah. I recently put the reply, anything that I said in this that seems like an arrogant condemnation of Utah is entirely justified. It's entirely justified. No, it's a joke. It's a presumptive, dramatic, creative license that I get to make up that Oregon is better or worse or different. It represents curiosity and courage and happiness and everything wonderful. Or wherever you are, that could be a place of grace and courage and appreciation and happiness. And you can take it with you, whatever state you go to, whatever country you go to, whatever room you go to, whatever color your hair is, whatever shirt we're wearing. Eternal grace.